welcome back to Beef with Biff. Today we'll be preparing barbecue beef with a boysenberry sauce. Now for this recipe you need 3 pounds of ground beef, bam, and my bada bing bada boom barbecue sauce. You can get all these recipes on the bar down below. Now first off, you want to grab your beef and a knife and boom, slice out that paper. Just like that. Oh, not sharp. Yeah, just like that. You want to slice it. I got some. Oh, it's bleeding. Oh, it's all blood's everywhere. Joe, we gotta cut the steak. Joe.
We interrupt this message to bring you the Maidens of Green Gables.
And Grace. It is week 4 in our Scarlet Pimpernel read along, or read aloud, or book club, whatever it is you wish to call it. And we are here with our delightfully fat cat Henry. He is playing with a ball of yarn and looking slightly disgruntled. But he is here to keep us company while we shall read. So I have my crocheting again, and Grace, who's not talking very much, hello, is going to read the first chapter. So, chapter 10. And to clarify, we're reading chapters 10 through 12 this week. Anyways, chapter 10. In the Opera Box. It was one of the gala nights at Covent Garden Theatre, the first of the autumn season in this memorable year of grace, 1792. The house was packed, both in the smart orchestra boxes and the pit, as well as in the more plebeian balconies and galleries above. Gluck's Orpheus made a strong appeal to the more intellectual portions of the house, whilst the fashionable women, the gaily dressed and brilliant throng, spoke to the eye of those who cared but little for this latest importation from Germany. Silly in the Stars had been duly applauded after a grand aria by her numerous admirers. Benjamin Incledon, the acknowledged favourite of the ladies, had received special gracious recognition from the royal box. And now the curtain came down after the glorious finale of the second act, and the audience, which had hung spellbound on the magic strains of the great maestro, seemed collectively to breathe a long sigh of satisfaction, previous to letting loose its hundreds of waggish and frivolous tongues. In the smart orchestra boxes many well-known faces were to be seen. Mr. Pitt, overweighted with cares of state, was finding brief relaxation in tonight's musical treat. The Prince of Wales, jovial, rotund, somewhat coarse and commonplace in appearance, moved about from box to box, spending brief quarters of an hour with those of his more intimate friends. In Lord Grenville's box, too, a curious, interesting personality attracted everyone's attention. A thin, small figure with shrewd, sarcastic face and deep-set eyes, attended to the music, keenly critical of the audience, dressed in immaculate black, with dark hair free from any powder. Lord Grenville, Foreign Secretary of State, paid him marked, though frigid, deference. Here and there, uttered about among distinctly English types of beauty, one or two foreign faces stood out in marked contrast. The haughty, aristocratic cast of countenance of the many French royalist émigrés who, persecuted by the relentless revolutionary faction of their country, had found a peaceful refuge in England. On these faces sorrow and care were deeply writ. The women especially paid but little heed either to the music or to the brilliant audience. No doubt their thoughts were far away with husband, brother, son maybe, still in peril or lately succumbed to a cruel fate. Among these, the Comtesse de Tournay de Basserive had lately arrived from France, was a most conspicuous figure. Dressed in deep, heavy black silk, with only a white-laced kerchief to relieve the aspect of mourning about her person, he sat beside Lady Portelares, who was vainly trying, on witty sallies and somewhat broad jokes, to bring a smile to the Comtesse's sad mouth. Behind her sat little Suzanne and the Vicomte, both silent and somewhat shy among so many strangers. Suzanne's eyes seemed wistful. When she first entered the crowded house, she had looked eagerly all around, scanned every face, scrutinized every box. Evidently the one face she wished to see was not there, for she settled herself down quietly behind her mother, listened apathetically to the music, and took no further interest in the audience itself. "Ah, Lord Grenville!" said Lady Portelares, as, following a discreet knock, the clever, interesting head of the Secretary of State appeared in the doorway of the box. "You would not arrive more apropos. Here is Madame la Comtesse de Tournay positively dying to hear the latest news from France." The distinguished diplomatist had come forward and was shaking hands with the ladies. "Alas," says Hadley, "it is of the very worst. The massacres continue, Paris literally reeks with blood, and the guillotine claims 100 victims a day." Pale and tearful, the Comtesse was leaning back in her chair, listening horror-struck to this brief and graphic account of what was going on in her own misguided country. "Ah, monsieur," she said in broken English, "it is dreadful to hear all that, and my poor husband still in that awful country. It is terrible for me to be sitting here in a theatre, all safe and in peace, whilst he is in such peril." "Lad, madame," said honest, bluff Lady Portelares, "your sitting in a convent won't make your husband safe, and you've got children to consider. They are too young to be dosed with anxiety and premature mourning." The Comtesse smiled through her tears at the vehemence of her friend. Lady Portelares, whose voice and manner were not amiss fitted a jockey, had a heart of gold and hid the most genuine sympathy and most gentle kindliness beneath the somewhat coarse manners affected by some ladies at that time. "Besides which, madame," added Lord Grenville, "I did not tell me yesterday that the League of the Scarlet Pimpernel had pledged their honour to bring Monsieur le Comte safely across the Channel?" "Ah, yes," said the Comtesse, "and that is my only hope. I saw Lord Hastings yesterday. He reassured me again." "Then I am sure you have no need to fear. What the League have sworn, that they surely will accomplish. Ah," added the old diplomatist with a sigh, "if I were but a few years younger." "La, man," interrupted honest Lady Portelares, "you are still young enough to turn your back on that French scarecrow that sits enthroned in your books tonight." "I wish I could, but your ladyship must remember that in serving our country we must put prejudices aside. Monsieur Chauvelin is the accredited agent of his government." "Odds fish, man," she retorted, "you don't call those bloodthirsty ruffians of their government, do you?" "It is not yet thought advisable, as yet," said the minister guardedly, "for England to break off diplomatic relations with France, and they cannot therefore refuse to receive with courtesy any agent she wishes to send to us." "Diplomatic relations be dashed, my lord! That sly little fox over there is nothing but a spy, I'll warrant, and you'll find, and I'm much mistaken, that he'll concern himself little with diplomacy, beyond trying to do mischief to royal refugees. To our heroic Scarlet Pimpernel, the members of that brave little league." "I am sure," said the Comtesse, pursing up her thin lips, "that if this Chauvelin wishes to do us mischief, he will find an ally in Lady Blakeney." "Bless the woman!" ejaculated Lady Portelares. "Did anyone ever see that perversity? My Lord Grenville, you have the gift of the gab. Will you please explain, Madame la Comtesse, that you're acting like a fool? In your position here in England, madame," she added, turning a wrathful, resolute face toward the Comtesse, "you cannot afford to put on the hoity-toity airs you French aristocrats are so fond of. Lady Blakeney may not be in sympathy with those ruffians in France. She may or may not have had anything to do with the arrest and condemnation of Saint-Cyr, or whatever the man's name is. But she is the leader of fashion in this country. Sir Percy Blakeney has more money than any half-dozen other men put together. He is hand and glove with royalty, and your trying to snub Lady Blakeney will not harm her, but will make you look a fool. Isn't that so, my lord?" But what Lord Grenville thought of this matter, or to what reflections this homely tired Lady Portelares led the Comtesse de Tournay, remained unspoken, for the curtain had just risen on the third act of Orpheus, and admonishments to silence came from every part of the house. Lord Grenville took a hasty farewell of the ladies and slipped back into his own box, where Monsieur Chauvelin had sat throughout this entr'acte. How do you say that?
I think it's entr'acte.
With his eternal snuff-box in his hand, and with his keen pale eyes intently fixed upon the box opposite him, where, with much frou-frou of silken skirts, much laughter and general stir of curiosity amongst the audience, Marguerite Blakeney had just entered, accompanied by her husband, and looking divinely pretty beneath the wealth of her golden reddish curls, slightly besprinkled with powder, and tied back at the nape of her graceful neck with a gigantic black bow. Always dressed in the very latest vagary of fashion, Marguerite alone among the ladies that night had discarded the cross-cover fichu and broad-lapelled overdress, which had been in fashion for the last 2 or 3 years. She wore the short-waisted, classical-shaped gown, which so soon was to become the approved mode in every country in Europe. It suited her graceful, meagre figure to perfection, composed as it was of shimmering stuff which seemed a mass of rich gold embroidery. As she entered, she leant for a moment out of the box, taking stock of all those present whom she knew. Many bowed to her as she did so, and from the royal box there also came a quick and gracious salute. Chauvelin watched her intently all through the commencement of the third act, as she sat enthralled with the music, her exquisite little hand toying with a small jewelled fan, her regal head, her throat, arms, and neck covered with magnificent diamonds and rare gems, a gift of the adoring husband, who sprawled leisurely by her side. Marguerite was passionately fond of music. Orpheus charmed her tonight. The very joy of living was writ plainly upon the sweet young face. It sparkled out of the merry blue eyes and lit up the smile that lurked around the lips. She was, after all, but 25, in the heyday of youth, the darling of the brilliant throng, adored, petted, cherished. 2 days ago, the Daydream had returned from Calais, bringing her news that her idolized brother had safely landed, that he thought of her and would be prudent for her sake. What wonder for the moment, in listening to Gluck's impassioned strain, that she forgot her disillusionments, forgot her vanished love dreams, forgot even the lazy, good-humoured nonentity who had made up for his lack of spiritual attainments by lavishing worldly advantages upon her. He had stayed beside her in the box just as long as convention demanded, making way for his royal highness, and for the host of admirers who, in a continued procession, came to pay homage to the queen of fashion. Sir Percy had strolled away to talk to more congenial friends, probably. Margaret did not even wonder whither he had gone. She cared so little. She had a little court around her, composed of the je ne sais doré of London, and had just dismissed them all, wishing to be alone with Gluck for a brief while. A discreet knock at the door roused her from her enjoyment. "Come in," she said with some impatience, without turning to look at the intruder. Chauvelin, waiting for his opportunity, noted that she was alone, and now, without pausing for that impatient "come in," he quietly slipped into the box, and in the next moment was standing behind Marguerite's chair. "A word with you, citizen," he said quietly. Marguerite turned quickly, in a line which was not altogether feigned. "Lud, man, you frightened me," he said with a forced little laugh. "Your presence is entirely inopportune. I want to listen to Gluck, and have no mind for talking." "But this is my only opportunity," he said as quietly, and without waiting for permission, he drew a chair close behind her, so close that he could whisper in her ear without disturbing the audience and without being seen in the dark background of the box. "This is my only opportunity," he repeated, as she vouchsafed him no reply. "Lady Blakeney is always so surrounded, so feted by her court, that a mere old friend has but very little chance." "Faith, man," he said impatiently, "you must seek for another opportunity, then. I am going to Lord Grenville's ball tonight after the opera. So are you, probably. I'll give you 5 minutes then." 3 minutes in the privacy of his box are quite sufficient for me," he rejoined placidly. "And I think yet you will be wise to listen to me, citizen Saint-Just." Marguerite instinctively shivered. Chauvelin had not raised his voice above a whisper. He was now quietly taking a pinch of snuff. Yet there was something in his attitude, something in those pale, foxy eyes, which seemed to freeze the blood in her veins, as with the sight of some deadly, hitherto unguessed peril. "Is that a threat, citizen?" she asked at last. "Nay, fair lady," he said gallantly, "only an arrow shot into the air." He paused a moment, like a cat which sees a mouse running heedlessly by, ready to spring, yet waiting for that feline sense of enjoyment of mischief about to be done. Then he said quietly, "Your brother Saint-Just is in peril." Not a muscle moved in the beautiful face before him. He could only see it in profile, for Marguerite had seemed to be watching the stage intently, but Chauvelin was a keen observer. He noticed the sudden rigidity of the eyes, the hardening of the mouth, the sharp, almost paralyzed tension of the graceful, beautiful figure. "Alack, then," he said with affected merriment, "since 'tis one of your imaginary plots, you'd best go back to your own seat, leave me to enjoy the music." And with her hand she began to beat time nervously against the cushion of the box. Selina Storrs was singing the Chief Pharaoh to the audience that hung spellbound upon the prima donna's lips. Chauvelin did not move from his seat. He quietly watched that tiny nervous hand, the only indication that his shaft had indeed struck home. "Well," she said again, suddenly, "Well," she said suddenly and irreverently, and with the same feigned unconcern. "Well, citizen," he rejoined placidly, "about my brother? I have news of him for you, which I think will interest you, but first let me explain it, may I?" The question was unnecessary. He felt, though Marguerite still held her head steadily averted from him, that her every nerve was strained to hear what he had to say. The other day, citizen, he said, I asked for your help. France needed it, and I thought I could rely on you, and you gave me your answer. Since then, the exigencies of my own affairs and your own social duties have kept us apart, although many things have happened. To the point, I pray you, citizen, she said lightly. Music is entrancing, and the audience will get impatient at your talk. One moment, citizen. The day on which I had the honour of meeting you at Dover, and less than an hour after I had had your final answer, I obtained possession of some papers, which revealed another of those settled schemes for the escape of a batch of French aristocrats, that traitor de Tournay amongst them, all organized by that arch-meddler, the Scarlet Pimpernel. Some of the threads, too, of this mysterious organization have come into my hands, but not all, and I want you, nay, you must help me gather them together. Marguerite seemed to listen to him with marked impatience. She now shrugged her shoulders and said gaily, Bah, man! Have I not already told you that I care not for your schemes or about the Scarlet Pimpernel? And I have not spoken about my brother. A little patience, I entreat, citizen, he continued imperturbably. Two gentlemen, Lord Anthony Dewhurst and Sir Andrew Ffoulkes, were at the Fisherman's Rest at Dover that same night. I know, I saw them there. They were already known to my spies as members of that accursed league. It was Sir Andrew Ffoulkes who escorted the Comtesse de Tournay and her children across the Channel. When the two men were alone, my spies forced their way into the coffee room of the inn, and gagged and pinioned the two gallants, seized their papers, and brought them to me. In a moment she had guessed the danger. Papers? Had Armand been imprudent? The very thought struck her with nameless terror. Still she would not let this man see that she was feared. She laughed gaily and lightly. Faith, and your impudence passes belief, she said merrily. Robbery and violence in England, in a crowded inn. The men might have been caught in the act. What if they had? They are children of France, and had been trained by your humble servant. Had they been caught, they would have gone to jail, even to the gallows, without a word of protest or indiscretion. At any rate, it was well worth the risk. A crowded inn is safer for these little operations than you think, and my men have experience. Well, and those papers, she said carelessly. Unfortunately, though they give me cognizance of certain names, certain movements, enough, I think, to thwart their projected coup for the moment, it would only be for the moment, and still leaves me in ignorance of the identity of the Scarlet Pimpernel. La, my friend, she said with the same assumed flippancy of manner, then you are where you were before, aren't you? And you can let me enjoy the last strophe of the aria. Faith, she added, ostentatiously smothering an imaginary yawn, had you not spoken about my brother? I am coming to him now, citizen. Among the papers there was a letter to Sir Andrew Ffoulkes, written by your brother, Saint-Just. Well, and? That letter shows him to not only be in sympathy with the enemies of France, but actually a helper, if not a member, of the League of the Scarlet Pimpernel. The blow had been struck at last. All along, Marguerite had been expecting it. She would not show fear. She was determined to seem unconcerned, flippant even. She wished, when the shock came, to be prepared for it, to have all her wits about her, those which had been nicknamed the keenest in Europe. Even now she did not flinch. She knew that Chauvelin had spoken the truth. The man was too earnest, too blindly devoted to the misguided cause that he had at heart, too proud of his countrymen, of those markers of revolution, to stoop to low, purposeless falsehoods. That letter of Armand's, foolish, imprudent Armand, was in Chauvelin's hands. Marguerite knew that as if she had seen the letter with her own eyes, and Chauvelin would hold that letter for purposes of his own until it suited him to destroy it or to make use of it against Armand. All that she knew, and yet she continued to laugh more gaily, more loudly than she had before. La, man, she said, speaking over her shoulder, and looking him full squarely in the face. Did I not say it was some imaginary plot? Armand in league with that enigmatic Scarlet Pimpernel. Armand busy helping those French aristocrats whom he despises? Faith, the tale does infinite credit to your imagination. Let me make my point clear, citizen, said Chauvelin with the same unruffled calm. I must assure you that Saint-Just is compromised beyond the slightest hope of pardon. Inside the orchestra box all was silent for a moment or two. Marguerite sat straight upright, rigid and inert, trying to think, trying to face the situation, to realize what had best be done. In the house, Doris had finished the aria, and was even now bowing in her classic garb, but in approved 18th century fashion, to the enthusiastic audience who cheered her to the echo. Chauvelin, said Marguerite Blakeney at last, quietly, and without the touch of bravado which had characterized her attitude all along. Chauvelin, my friend, shall we try to understand one another? It seems my wits have become rusty by contact with this damp climate. Now tell me, you are very anxious to discover the identity of the Scarlet Pimpernel, isn't that so? France's most bitter enemy, citizen, are all the more dangerous as he works in the dark. All the more noble, you mean? Well, and you would now force me to do some spying work for you in exchange for my brother Armand's safety? Is that it? Fie, to a very ugly words, fair lady, protested Chauvelin urbanely. There can be no question of force, and the service which I ask of you is in the name of France, which could never be called by the shocking name of spying. At any rate, that is what it is called over here, she said dryly. That is your intention, is it not? My intention is that you yourself win a free pardon for Armand Saint-Just by doing me a small service. What is it? Only watch me tonight, citizen Saint-Just, he said eagerly. Listen, among the papers which were found about the person of Sir Andrew Ffoulkes was a tiny note. See? He added, taking a tiny scrap of paper from his pocket-book and handing it to her. It was the same scrap of paper which, 4 years ago, the two young men had been in the act of reading, at the very moment when they were attacked by Chauvelin's minions. Marguerite took it mechanically and stooped to read it. There were only 2 lines, written in distorted, evidently disguised handwriting. She read them half aloud. Remember, we must not meet more often than is strictly necessary. You have all instructions for the second. If you wish to meet me again, I shall be at G's ball. What does it mean? She asked. Look again, citizen, and you will understand. There is a device here in the corner, a small red flower. Yes, the Scarlet Pimpernel, she said eagerly. And G's ball means Grenville's ball. He will be at my Lord Grenville's ball tonight. That is how I interpret the note, citizen, concluded Chauvelin blandly. Lord Anthony Dewhurst and Sir Andrew Ffoulkes, after they were pinioned and searched by my spies, were carried by my orders to a lonely house on Delaware Road, which I rented for the purpose. There they remained close prisoners until this morning. But having found this tiny scrap of paper, my intention was that they should be in London in time to attend my Lord Grenville's ball. You see, do you not, that they must have a great deal to say to their chief, and thus they will have an opportunity of speaking to him tonight, just as he directed them to do. Therefore, this morning, those 2 young gallants found every bar and bolt open in the lonely house on Delaware Road. Their jail had disappeared, and 2 good horses standing ready saddled and tethered in the yard. I have not seen them yet, but I think we may safely conclude they did not draw rein until they reached London. Now, you see how simple it all is, citizen. It does seem simple, doesn't it? She said with a final bitter attempt at flippancy. When you want to kill a chicken, you take hold of it, then you wring its neck. It's only the chicken who does not find it quite so simple. Now you hold a knife at my throat, and a hostage for my obedience. You find it simple. I don't. Nay, citizen, I offer you a chance of saving the brother you love from the consequences of his own folly. Margaret's face softened. Her eyes at last grew moist, as she murmured half to herself, the only being in the world who has loved me truly and constantly. But what do you want me to do, Chauvelin? She said in a world of despair in her tear-choked voice. With a world of despair in her tear-choked voice. In my present position it is well nigh impossible. Nay, citizen, he said dryly and relentlessly, not heeding that despairing, childlike appeal, which might have melted a heart of stone. As Lady Blakeney, no one suspects you, and with your help tonight, I may, who knows, succeed in finally establishing the identity of the Scarlet Pimpernel. You are going to the Belle anon. Watch me there, citizen. Watch and listen. You can tell me if you hear a word by chance or whisper. You can note every one to whom Sir Andrew Ffoulkes or Lord Anthony Dewhurst will speak. You are absolutely beyond suspicion now. The Scarlet Pimpernel will be at Lord Grenville's ball tonight. Find out who he is, and I will pledge the word of France that your brother shall be safe. Chauvelin was putting the knife to her throat. Marguerite felt herself entangled in one of those webs from which she could hope for no escape. The precious hostage was being held for her obedience, for she knew that this man would never make an empty threat. No doubt Armand was already signalled to the Committee of Public Safety as one of the suspect. He would not be allowed to leave France again, and would be ruthlessly struck if she refused to obey Chauvelin. For a moment, womanlike, she still hoped to temporize. She held out her hand to this man, whom she now feared and hated. If I promise to help you in this matter, Chauvelin, said presently, will you give me that letter, Saint-Just? If you render me useful assistance tonight, citizen, he replied with a sarcastic smile, I will give you that letter. Tomorrow. You do not trust me? I trust you absolutely, dear lady, but St. Just's life is forfeit to his country. It rests with you to redeem it. I may be powerless to help you, she pleaded, were I ever so willing. That would be terrible indeed, he said quietly, for you, and for St. Just. Marguerite shuddered. She felt that from this man she could expect no mercy. All-powerful, he held the beloved life in the hollow of his hand. She knew him too well not to know that, if he failed in gaining his own ends, he would be pitiless. She felt cold in spite of the oppressive air of the opera-house. The heart-appealing strains of the music seemed to reach her as from a distant land. She drew her costly lace scarf up around her shoulders and sat silently watching the brilliant scene as if in a dream. For a moment her thoughts wandered away from the loved one who was in danger, to that other man who also had a claim on her confidence and her affection. She felt lonely, frightened for Armand's sake. She longed to seek comfort and advice from someone who would know how to help and console. Sir Percy Blakeney had loved her once. He was her husband. Why should he stand alone through this terrible ordeal? He had very little brains, it is true, but he had plenty of muscle. Surely if she provided the thought, he had the manly energy and pluck together, they could outwit the astute diplomatist, and save the hostage from his vengeful hands, without imperiling the life of the noble leader of that gallant little band of heroes. Sir Percy knew St. Just well. He seemed attached to him. She was sure he could help. Chauvelin was taking no further heed of her. He had said his cruel either-or, and left her to decide. He, in his turn now, appeared to be absorbed in the soul-stirring melodies of Orpheus, and was beating time to the music with a sharp ferret-like head. A discreet rap at the door aroused Marguerite from her thoughts. It was Sir Percy Blakeney, tall, sleepy, good-humoured, wearing that half-shy, half-inane smile, which just now seemed to irritate her every nerve. Your chair's outside, my dear," he said with his most exasperating drawl. "I suppose you don't want to go to that awful ball. Excuse me, Monsieur Chauvelin, I had not observed you." He extended two slender white fingers towards Chauvelin, who had risen when Sir Percy entered the box. "Are you coming, my dear?" "Hush, hush!" came in angry remonstrance from different parts of the house. "Dashed impudence," commented Sir Percy with a good-natured smile. Marguerite sighed impatiently. Her last hope seemed suddenly to have vanished away. She wrapped her cloak round her without looking at her husband. "I am ready to go," she said, taking his arm. At the door of the box she turned and looked straight at Chauvelin, who, with his chapeau bras, there's something under his arm, something in French, and a curious smile round his thin lips, was preparing to follow the strangely ill-assorted couple. "It is only au revoir, Chauvelin," he said pleasantly. "We shall meet at my Lord Grenville's ball anon." And in her eyes the astute Frenchman read, no doubt, something which caused him profound satisfaction, for, with a sarcastic smile, he took a delicate pinch of snuff, then, having dusted his dainty legs jabot, he rubbed his thin bony hands contentedly together. What is snuff?
I think it's like
Is it like some sort of like tobacco type?
I want to say that, but I'm not sure if that's correct.
Chapter 11. Lord Grenville's Ball. The historic ball given by the then Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs, Lord Grenville, was the most brilliant function of the year. Though the autumn season had only just begun, everybody who was anybody had contrived to be in London in time to be present there, and to shine at this ball, to the best of his or her respective ability. His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales had promised to be present. He was coming on presently from the opera. Lord Grenville himself had listened to the two first acts of Orpheus, before preparing to receive his guests. At 10 o'clock, an unusually late hour in those days, the grand rooms of the Foreign Office, exquisitely decorated with exotic palms and flowers, were filled to overflowing. One room had been set apart for dancing, and the dainty strains of the minuet made a soft accompaniment to the gay chatter, the merry laugh of the numerous and brilliant company. In a small chamber, facing the top of the fine stairway, the distinguished host stood ready to receive his guest. Distinguished men, beautiful women, notabilities from every European country had already filed past him, had exchanged the elaborate bows and curtsies with him which the extravagant fashion of the time demanded, and then
laughing and talking, had dispersed in the ball, reception card rooms beyond. Not far from Lord Grenville's elbow, leaning against one of the console tables, Chauvelin, in his irreproachable black costume, was taking a quiet survey of the brilliant throng. He noted that Sir Percy and Lady Blakeney had not yet arrived, and his keen pale eyes glanced quickly towards the door every time a new comer appeared. He stood somewhat isolated. The envoy of the revolutionary government of France was not likely to be very popular in England, at a time when the news of the awful September massacres and of the reign of terror and anarchy had just begun to filtrate across the Channel. In his official capacity he had been received courteously by his English colleagues. Mr. Pitt had shaken him by the hand, Lord Grenville had entertained him more than once, but the more intimate circles of London society ignored him altogether. The women openly turned their backs upon him. The men who held no official position refused to shake his hand. But Chauvelin was not the man to trouble himself about these social amenities, which he called mere incidents in his diplomatic career. He was blindly enthusiastic for the revolutionary cause, he despised all social inequalities, and he had a burning love for his own country. These three sentiments made him supremely indifferent to the snubs he received in this fog-ridden, loyalist, old-fashioned England. But above all, Chauvelin had a purpose at heart. He firmly believed that the French aristocrat was the most bitter enemy of France. He would have wished to see every one of them annihilated. He was one of those who, during this awful reign of terror, had been the first to utter the historic and ferocious desire that aristocrats might have but one head between them, so that it might be cut off with a single stroke of the guillotine. And thus he looked upon every French aristocrat who had succeeded in escaping from France as so much prey of which the guillotine had been unwarrantably cheated. There is no doubt that these royalist emigres, once they had managed to cross the frontier, did their very best to stir up foreign indignation against France. Plots without end were hatched in England and Belgium and Holland to try and induce some great power to send troops into revolutionary Paris, to free King Louis, and to summarily hang the bloodthirsty leaders of that monster republic. Small wonder, therefore, that the romantic and mysterious personality of the Scarlet Pimpernel was a source of bitter hatred to Chauvelin. He and the few young jackanapes under his command, well furnished with money, armed with boundless daring, and acute cunning, had succeeded in rescuing hundreds of aristocrats from France. 9/10 of the emigres who were feted at the English court owed their safety to that man, to his league. Chauvelin had sworn to his colleagues in Paris that he would discover the identity of that meddlesome Englishman, entice him over to France, and then Chauvelin drew a deep breath of satisfaction at the very thought of seeing that enigmatic head falling under the knife of the guillotine as easily as that of any other man.
What a wretched little man!
Suddenly there was a great stir on the handsome staircase. All conversation stopped for a moment as the major-domo's voice outside announced, His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales and suite Sir Percy Blakeney, Lady Blakeney. Lord Grenville went quickly to the door to receive his exalted guest. The Prince of Wales, dressed in a magnificent court suit of salmon-coloured velvet richly embroidered with gold, entered with Marguerite Blakeney on his arm, and on his left Sir Percy, in gorgeous shimmering cream satin, cut in the extravagant, incroyable style, his fair hair free from powder, priceless lace at his neck and wrists, and the flat chapeau bras under his arm. After the few conventional words of deferential greeting, Lord Grenville said to his royal guest, Will your Highness permit me to introduce M. Chauvelin, the accredited agent of the French government? Chauvelin, immediately the prince entered, had to step forward, expecting this introduction. He bowed very low, whilst the prince returned his salute with a curt nod of the head. Monsieur, said his Royal Highness coldly, we will try to forget the government that sent you, and will look upon you merely as our guest, a private gentleman from France. As such you are welcome, monsieur. Monsieur, rejoined Chauvelin, bowing once again. Madame, he added, bowing ceremoniously before Marguerite. Ah, my little Chauvelin, she said with unconcerned gaiety, and extending her tiny hand to him. Monsieur and I are old friends, your Royal Highness. Ah, then, said the prince, this time very graciously, you are doubly welcome, monsieur. There is someone else I would crave permission to present to your Royal Highness. Here interposed Lord Grenville. "Ah, who is it?" asked the prince. "Madam, who is it?" "Ah, who is it?" asked the prince. "Madame la Comtesse de Tournay de Basse-Rive and her family, who have but recently come from France. By all means, they are among the lucky ones, then." Lord Grenville turned in search of the Comtesse, who sat at the further end of the room. "Lud love me," whispered his Royal Highness to Marguerite as soon as he had caught sight of the rigid figure of the old lady. "Lud love me, she looks very virtuous and very melancholy." "Faith, your Royal Highness," she rejoined with a smile, "virtue is like precious odours, most fragrant when it is crushed."
What?
"Virtue, alas," sighed the prince, "it is most unbecoming to your charming sex, madame." "Madame la Comtesse de Tournay de Basse-Rive," said Lord Grenville, introducing the lady. "This is a pleasure, madame. My royal father, as you know, is ever glad to welcome those of your compatriots whom France has driven from her shores." "Your Royal Highness is ever gracious," replied the Comtesse with a becoming dignity. Then, indicating her daughter, who stood timidly by her side, "My daughter Suzanne, monsieur?" she said. "Ah, charming, charming," said the prince. "And now allow me, Comtesse, to introduce to you Lady Blakeney, who honours us with her friendship. You and she will have much to say to one another, I vow. Every compatriot of Lady Blakeney is doubly welcome for her sake. Her friends are our friends, her enemies, the enemies of England." Marguerite's blue eyes had twinkled with merriment at this gracious speech from her exalted friend. The Comtesse de Tournay, who lately had so flagrantly insulted her, was here receiving a public lesson at which Marguerite could not help but rejoice. But the Comtesse, for whom respect of royalty amounted almost to a religion, was too well schooled in courtly etiquette to show the slightest sign of embarrassment as the two ladies curtsied ceremoniously to one another. "His Royal Highness is ever gracious, madame," said Marguerite demurely, and with a wealth of mischief in her twinkling blue eyes. "But here there is no need for his kind mediation. Your amiable reception of me at our last meeting still dwells pleasantly in my memory." "We poor exiles, madame," rejoined the Comtesse frigidly, "show our gratitude to England by devotion to the wishes of monsieur." "Madame," said Marguerite with another ceremonious curtsy. "Madame," responded the Comtesse with equal dignity. The prince, in the meanwhile, was saying a few gracious words to the young Vicomte. "I am happy to know you, monsieur le Vicomte," he said. "I knew your father well when he was ambassador in London." "Ah, monsieur," replied the Vicomte, "I was a little boy then, and now I owe the honour of this meeting to our protector, the Scarlet Pimpernel." "Hush!" said the prince earnestly and quickly, as he indicated Chauvelin, who stood a little on one side throughout the whole of this little scene, watching Marguerite and the Comtesse with an amused, sarcastic little smile around his thin lips. They keep on saying that, thin lips. "Nay, monsieur," he said now, as if in direct response to the prince's challenge, "pray do not check this gentleman's display of gratitude. The name of that interesting red flower is well known to me and to France." The prince looked at him keenly for a moment or two. "Faith then, monsieur," he said, "perhaps you know more about our national hero than we do ourselves. Perchance you know who he is. See," he added, turning to the groups around the room, "the ladies hang upon your lips. You would render yourself popular among the fair sex if you were to gratify their curiosity." "Ah, monsieur," said Chauvelin significantly, "rumour has it in France that your Highness could, and you would, give the truest account of that enigmatical wayside flower." He looked quickly and keenly at Marguerite as he spoke, but she betrayed no emotion, and her eyes met his quite fearlessly. "Nay, man," replied the prince, "my lips are sealed, and members of the League jealously guard the secret of their chief. So his fair adorers have to be content with worshipping a shadow. Here in England, monsieur," he added with wonderful charm and dignity, "we have but named the Scarlet Pimpernel, and every fair cheek is suffused with a blush of enthusiasm."
Who's talking? The prince?
The prince. The prince! "None have seen him save his faithful lieutenants. We know not if he be short or tall, fair or dark, handsome or ill-formed, and we know that he is the bravest gentleman in all the world, and we all feel a little proud, monsieur, when we remember that he is an Englishman. Ah, Monsieur Chauvelin," added Marguerite, looking almost with defiance across at the placid, sphinx-like face of the Frenchman, His Royal Highness should add that we ladies think of him as a hero of old. We worship him, we wear his badge. We tremble for him when he is in danger, and exult with him in his hour of victory. Chauvelin did no more than bow placidly, both to the prince and to Marguerite. He felt that both speeches were intended, each in their own way, to convey contempt or defiance. The pleasure-loving, idle prince he despised. The beautiful woman who in her golden hair wore a spray of small red flowers composed of rubies and diamonds, her he held in the hollow of his hand. He could afford to remain silent and to wait events. A long, jovial, inane laugh broke the sudden silence which had fallen over everyone. And we poor husbands, come in slow, affected accents from gorgeous Sir Percy, we have to stand by while they worship or dash shadow. Everyone laughed, the prince more loudly than anyone. The tension of subdued excitement was relieved, and the next moment everyone was laughing and chatting merrily as the gay crowd broke up and dispersed in the adjoining rooms. I wonder if the prince knows.
Yeah.
That's what it sounds like to me.
Yeah, and yeah.
Save your comments for later. Chapter 12. Marguerite suffered intensely. Though she laughed and chatted, though she was more admired, more surrounded, more feted than any woman there, she felt like one condemned to death, living her last day upon this earth. Her nerves were in a state of panic, a painful tension, which had increased 100-fold during that brief hour which she had spent in her husband's company between the opera and the ball. The short ray of hope that she might find in his good-natured, lazy individual a valuable friend and adviser had vanished as quickly as it had come, the moment she found herself alone with him. The same feeling of good-humoured contempt which one feels for an animal or a faithful servant made her turn away with a smile from the man who would have been her moral support in this heart-rending crisis through which she was passing, who should have been her cool-headed adviser, when feminine sympathy and sentiment tossed her hither and thither, between her love for her brother, who was far away and in mortal peril, and horror of the awful service which Chauvelin had enacted from her, in exchange for Armand's safety. There he stood, the moral support, the cool-headed adviser, surrounded by a crowd of brainless, empty-headed young fops, who were even now repeating from mouth to mouth, and with every sign of the keenest enjoyment, a doggerel quatrain which he had just given forth. Everywhere the absurd, silly words met her, people seemed to have little else to speak about. Even the prince had asked her with a laugh whether she appreciated her husband's latest poetic efforts.
No, brother.
All done in the tying of a cravat, Sir Percy had declared to his clique of admirers. And now, the fated rhyme. Drum roll, please. We seek him here, we seek him there. Those Frenchies seek him everywhere. Is he in heaven, or is he in hell? That dashed, elusive Pimpernel. Oh! Sir Percy's bon mot had gone the round of the brilliant reception rooms. The prince was enchanted. He vowed that life without Blakeney would be but a dreary desert.
Life as it could be a blank to me.
Then, taking him by the arm, had led him to the card-room and engaged him in a long game of hazard. See, put the prince down to talk about later.
I did.
Okay. Sir Percy, whose chief interest in most social gatherings seemed to centre around the card table, usually allowing his wife to flirt, dance, to muse, or bore herself as much as she liked.
That's awful.
And tonight, having delivered himself to his bon mot, he had left Marguerite surrounded by a crowd of admirers of all ages, all anxious and willing to help her to forget that somewhere in the spacious reception rooms there was a long, lazy being who had been fool enough to suppose that the cleverest woman in Europe would settle down to the prosaic bonds of English matrimony. What a sad life.
I know.
Her still overwrought nerves, her excitement and agitation, lent beautiful Margaret Blakeney much additional charm, escorted by a veritable bevy of men of all ages and of most nationalities. She called forth many exclamations of admiration from every one as she passed. She would not allow herself any more time to think. Her early, somewhat bohemian training had made her somewhat of a fatalist. She felt that events would shape themselves, that the directing of them was not in her hands. From Chauvelin she knew that she could expect no mercy. He had set a price upon Armand's head, and left it to her to pay or not, as she chose. Later in the evening she caught sight of Sir Andrew Ffoulkes and Lord Anthony Dewhurst, who seemingly had just arrived. She noticed at once that Sir Andrew immediately made for little Suzanne de Tournay, and that the two young people soon managed to isolate themselves in one of the deep embrasures of the mullioned windows, there to carry on a long conversation which seemed very earnest and very pleasant on both sides. Both the young men looked a little haggard and anxious, and otherwise they were irreproachably dressed, and there was not the slightest sign of their courtly demeanour of the terrible catastrophe which they must have felt hovering round them, and round their chief. But the League of the Scarlet Pimpernel had no intention of abandoning its cause. She had gathered through little Suzanne herself, who spoke openly of the assurance she and her mother had had that the Count de Tournay would be rescued from France by the League within the next few days. Vaguely she began to wonder, as she looked at the brilliant and fashionable crowd in the gaily lighted ballroom, which of these worldly men round her was the mysterious Scarlet Pimpernel. She held the threads of such daring plots and the fate of valuable lives in his hands. Who held the threads of such daring plots and the fate of valuable lives in his hands? A burning curiosity seized her to know him, although for months she had heard of him and had accepted his anonymity, as everyone else in society had done. But now she longed to know, quite impersonally, quite apart from Armand, and quite apart from Chauvelin, only for her own sake, for the sake of the enthusiastic admiration she had always bestowed on his bravery and cunning. He was at the ball, of course, somewhere, since Sir Andrew Ffoulkes and Lord Anthony Dewhurst were here, evidently to meet their chief, and perhaps to get a fresh mot d'adieu from him.
A fresh what?
Do I have to repeat it?
I just didn't.
I don't.
Never mind.
I don't know what it is. Probably instructions, I guess. Marguerite looked around at everyone at the aristocratic, high-type Norman faces. The squarely built, fair-haired Saxon, the more gentle, humorous cast of the Celt, wondering which of these betrayed the power, the energy, the cunning which had imposed its will and its leadership upon a number of high-born English gentlemen, among whom rumour asserted was his Royal Highness himself. That's funny. Sir Andrew Ffoulkes? Surely not, with his gentle blue eyes, which were looking so tenderly and lovingly after little Suzanne, who was being led away from the pleasant tete-a-tete by her stern mother. Marguerite watched him across the room as he finally turned away with a sigh and seemed to stand aimless and lonely, now that Suzanne's dainty little figure had disappeared in the crowd. She watched him as he strolled towards the doorway which led to a small boudoir beyond, then passed and leaned against the framework of it, looking still anxiously all around him. Marguerite contrived for the moment to evade her present attentive cavalier, and she skirted the fashionable crowd, drawing nearer to the doorway against which Sir Andrew was leaning. Why she wished to get closer to him she could not have said. Perhaps she was impelled by an all-powerful fatality, which so often seems to rule the destinies of men. Suddenly she stopped. Her very heart seemed to stand still. Her eyes, large and excited, flashed for a moment towards that doorway, then as quickly were turned away again. Sir Andrew Ffoulkes was still in the same listless position by the door, but Margaret had distinctly seen that Lord Hastings, a young buck, a friend of her husband's and one of the princes, had, as he quickly brushed past him, slipped something into his hand. For one moment longer, it was the merest flash, Marguerite could pause. The next she had, with admirable plate and unconcern, resumed her walk across the room, but this time more quickly towards the doorway, whence Sir Andrew had now disappeared. All this from the moment that Marguerite had caught sight of Sir Andrew, leaning against the doorway, until she had followed him into the little boudoir beyond, had occurred in less than a minute. Fate is usually swift when she deals the blow. Now Lady Blakeney had suddenly ceased to exist. It was Marguerite St. Just who was there only. Marguerite St. Just, who had passed her childhood, her early youth, in the protecting arms of her brother Armand. She had forgotten everything else, her rank, her dignity, her secret enthusiasms, everything save that Armand stood in peril of his life, not there, not 20 feet away from her, in the small boudoir which was quite deserted, in the very hands of Sir Andrew Ffoulkes, might be the talisman which would save her brother's life. Barely under 30 seconds had elapsed between the moment when Lord Hastings slipped the mysterious something into Sir Andrew's hand, and the one when she in turn reached the deserted boudoir. Sir Andrew was standing with his back turned, and close to a table upon which stood massive silver candelabra. A slip of paper was in his hand, and he was in the very act of perusing its contents. Unperceived, her soft, clinging robe, making not the slightest sound upon the heavy carpet, not daring to breathe until she had accomplished her purpose. Marguerite slipped close behind him. At that moment he looked around and saw her. She uttered a groan, passed her hand across her forehead, and murmured faintly, "The heat in the room was terrible. I felt so faint. Ah!" She tottered almost as if she would fall, and Sir Andrew, quickly recovering himself and crumpling in his hand the tiny note he had been reading, was only apparently just in time to support her. "You are ill, Lady Blakeney?" he asked with much concern. "Let me—" No, nothing," she interrupted quickly. "A chair, quick!" She sank into a chair close to the table, and throwing back her head, closed her eyes. "There," she murmured still faintly. "The giddiness is passing off. Do not heed me, Sir Andrew. I assure you I already feel better."
Giddiness. Huh.
At moments like these, there is no doubt, and psychologists actually asserted, that there is in us a sense which has absolutely nothing to do with the other five. It is not that we see, it is not that we hear or touch, yet we seem to do all three at once. Marguerite sat there with her eyes apparently closed. Sir Andrew was immediately behind her, and on her right was the table with the 5-armed candelabra upon it. Before her mental vision there was absolutely nothing but Armand's face, Armand whose life was in the most imminent danger, and who seemed to be looking at her from a background upon which were dimly painted the seething crowd of Paris, the bare walls of the Tribunal of Public Safety, with Fouquet Tinville, the public prosecutor, demanding Armand's life in the name of the people of France, and the lowered guillotine with its strained knife waiting for another victim, Armand. For one moment there was dead silence in the little boudoir. Beyond, from the brilliant ballroom, the sweet notes of the gavotte, the frou-frou of rich dresses, the talk and laughter of a merry and large crowd, came as a strange, weird accompaniment to the drama which was being enacted here. Sir Andrew had not uttered another word. Then it was that that extra sense became potent in Margaret Blakeney. She could not see if her eyes were closed. She could not hear, for the noise from the ballroom drowned the soft rustle of that momentous scrap of paper. Nevertheless, she knew, as if she had both seen and heard, that Sir Andrew was even now holding the paper to the flame of one of the candles. At the exact moment that it began to catch fire, she opened her eyes, raised her hand, and with 2 dainty fingers had taken the burning scrap of paper from the young man's hand. Then she blew out the flame, and held the paper to her nostril with perfect unconcern. "How thoughtful you are, Sir Andrew," she said gaily. "Surely 'twas your grandmother who taught you that the smelt of burnt paper was a sovereign remedy against giddiness." She sighed with satisfaction, holding the paper tightly between her jewelled fingers, that talisman which perhaps would save her brother Armand's life. Sir Andrew was staring at her, too dazed for the moment to realize what had actually happened. He had been taken so completely by surprise that he seemed quite unable to grasp the fact that the little paper which she held in her dainty hand was one perhaps in which the life of his comrade might depend. Marguerite burst into a long merry peal of laughter. "Why do you stare at me like that?" she said playfully. "I assure you I feel much better. Your remedy has proved most effectual. This room is most delightfully cool," she added with the same perfect composure, "and the sound of the gavotte from the ballroom is fascinating and soothing." She was prattling on in the most unconcerned and pleasant way, while Sir Andrew, in an agony of mind, was racking his brains as to the quickest method as to the quickest method he could employ to get that bit of paper out of that beautiful woman's hand. Instinctively vague and tumultuous thoughts rushed through his mind. He suddenly remembered her nationality, and worst of all recollected that horrible tale anent the Marquis de St. Cyr, which in England no one had credited for the sake of Sir Percy as well as for her own. "What, still dreaming and staring?" she said with a merry laugh. "You are most ungallant, Sir Andrew, and now I come to think of it, you seemed more startled than pleased when you saw me just now. I do believe, after all, that it was not concern for my health, nor yet a remedy taught you by your grandmother that caused you to burn this tiny scrap of paper. I vow it must have been your lady love's last cruel epistle you were trying to destroy. Now confess," she added playfully, holding up the scrap of paper, "does this contain her final or a last appeal to kiss and make friends?" "Whichever it is, Lady Blakeney," said Sir Andrew, who was gradually recovering his self-possession, "that this little note is undoubtedly mine, and, not caring whether his action was one that would be styled ill-bred towards a lady." The young man had made a bold dash for the note, but Marguerite's thoughts flew quicker than his own. Her actions under pressure of this intense excitement were swifter and more sure. She was tall and strong. She took a quick step backwards and knocked over the small Sheraton table, which was already top-heavy, and which fell down with a crash, together with a massive candelabra upon it. She gave a quick cry of alarm. "The candles, Sir Andrew, quick!" There was not much damage done. One or two of the candles had blown out as the candelabra fell. Others had merely sent some grease upon the vulnerable carpet. One had ignited the paper shade over it. Sir Andrew quickly and dexterously put out the flames and replaced the candelabra upon the table. But this had taken him a few seconds to do, and those seconds had been all that Margaret needed to cast a quick glance at the paper, and to note its contents, a dozen words in the same distorted handwriting she had seen before, and bearing the same device, a star-shaped flower drawn in red ink. When Sir Andrew once more looked at her, he only saw on her face alarm at the untoward accident, and relief at its happy issue, whilst the tiny and momentous note had apparently fluttered to the ground. Eagerly the young man picked it up, and his face looked much relieved as his fingers closed tightly over it. "For shame, Sir Andrew," she said, shaking her head with a playful sigh, "making havoc in the heart of some impressionable duchess, whilst conquering the affections of my sweet little Suzanne. Well, well, I do believe it was Cupid himself who stood by you and threatened the entire Foreign Office with destruction by fire, just on purpose to make me drop love's message before it had been polluted by my indiscreet eyes. To think that a moment longer and I might have known the secrets of an erring duchess. You will forgive me, Lady Blakeney," said Sir Andrew, now as calm as she was herself, "if I resume the interesting occupation which you have interrupted." "By all means, Sir Andrew. How should I venture to thwart the love-god again? Perhaps he would mete out some terrible chastisement against my presumption. Burn your love token by all means." Sir Andrew had already twisted the paper into a long spill, and was once again holding it to the flame of the candle, which had remained alight. He did not notice the strange smile on the face of his fair vis-a-vis. So intent was he on the work of destruction. Perhaps had he done so, the look of relief would have faded from his face. He watched the fateful note as it curled under the flame. Soon the last fragment fell on the floor, and he placed his heel upon the ashes. "And now, Sir Andrew," said Margaret Blakeney with a pretty nonchalance peculiar to herself, and with the most winning of smiles, "will you venture to excite the jealousy of your fair lady by asking me to dance the minuet?" And that is the end.
Oh wow, that's a nice little cliffhanger.
Yes, it is.
I mean, it's not nice, but it's a good cliffhanger.
We're actually going through this quite fast. We're almost halfway.
Yeah, it was only like 10 weeks. Right.
Only 10 weeks.
Yes, well, quite interesting.
They're making the prince. His character sounds so much more serious and with it
Yeah.
than the.
And it's following the movie quite well, actually.
You mean the movie is following the book? Don't
Yeah,
you?
I mean, yes, exactly. The movie followed the book pretty well. Well, I guess not. Not the opening part, but this part at least.
as far as vaguely following it, it went really well.
This part of this is accurate to the movie was accurate to the book. That was interesting.
It's so sad, though.
I know. It's just, it's not what a marriage should be.
I know, it's just, like, so sad. But, although, if it's so sad now, it's going to be so much better. Oh, what do you call it?
Love's trial.
Yeah, if the trial is so much in the beginning, then the happy ending
So back to the joy.
will be so much the better, so much the richer, so much the worth the waiting for.
Yes. Yes. I thought it's really funny how Chauvelin's all in black kind of reminds me of Mr. Cullen's, kind of like, I guess he's a clergyman, he has to be all in black. But, I don't know, just like sticking out like a sore thumb.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
probably on purpose.
They got that right from the movie.
Yeah. And I was also thinking, I'm not exactly sure why, but Richard Armitage would have been a good, or would still be, maybe, I don't know. Would have been, at least, a good,
Would be. Say would be.
he could play him Chauvelin very well, I think.
Yeah, he has that look about him.
Yeah, I was reading something, and I just had a flashback picture of, what's his name? Richard Armitage as Guy Gisborne in the Robin Hood BBC version, because he's all in black in there, too. But, that he would have been really good he's a good villain.
Yeah, he's a good villain and a good hero.
Yeah. Also, the, yes, yeah, what was I gonna say? The burnt paper for giddiness. When I was thinking about it, when I was younger, I actually think, in the movie they say a burnt feather for giddiness. But I used to think that actually worked.
Well, do you think she's just making it up on the spot? That's what it sounds like.
In the book, it kind of sounds like she's making it up on the spot. But in the movie, she said the burnt paper is almost as good as a burnt feather for giddiness. And
Right, so that could have been a valid
thing.
remedy.
I always wanted to try it, but is giddiness like slap happy?
Giddiness is when you feel giddy.
I know, but like, why would you have to have a cure for giddiness?
Well, believe me, I'd like to have a cure for it.
Yeah. Also, how much fun would it be to go to a ball, people?
Yes.
So much fun. Dance
Although-
the minuet away.
Oh, I don't know, I just,
If you knew everybody.
the picture that they're painting with this ball, and everything, it's still tainted by melancholy feelings.
Okay, a ball in period, I'm saying. You go and everyone's in their fancy dresses and you talk to people and
Yes.
champagne and
Yeah, I have to. Yeah.
dance the minuet and what was the other one? Something else.
Gavotte.
Yeah, something. It'd be so fun. And I'm going to the opera. I would love to go to the opera.
Okay, I was thinking about this. You know how nowadays there's people who like opera, there's people that don't, and then there's people that have no, the stereotype, cool kid who just listens to rock music or whatever,
Yeah.
and wearing the baseball cap at the side with the big brim and that kind of thing, and the hoodies, that kind of picture. So, where were those people? How do they fit back in? Back in
Back in the day.
back in the Scott Pimpernel days? So, they had, because everyone, it was like the thing to do to go to the opera, and
Well, it was the thing. It was the
it was a social norm.
no, but it was the popular form of music.
Yeah, I guess so.
So would it be like going? I guess the equivalent, so to speak, of going to a pop concert. Yeah. These days. What a comparison.
But also, did you notice how Sir Percy, it was kind of a normal thing that he just left the box during the opera, and
chat.
went somewhere else, to chat or whatever, It also makes me think of, and also, at a ball, you have the dancing, the people who are visiting, people who are partaking of refreshments, and then you have, those that are playing cards.
Right. Well, that's like at a bar.
And it makes me think of Poldark.
Yeah.
How, all the guys were out in the card room playing cards, and
Or Dr. Thorne. Mr. Motter, come this minute.
Play whist. That's not quite the same.
No, but still.
Yes.
Yeah, we should, there's an opera around here somewhere, I think. We should totally go. I'm not that much of a big fan of opera music necessarily, but I think that it will be cool, really cool,
To go to
to
an
go
opera.
to an opera, because it's not just listening to it, it's seeing it, it's a play. Interesting. Yeah, but I think it'd be really cool, because there's also a lot of, I mean, like this one they're saying it was Orpheus, which I'm curious if that's the Greek myth Orpheus and Eurydice, that whole thing. Curious if that's that story, which I'm guessing it would be. But yeah, I think it'd be really cool though to go to an opera. We should go sometime.
I don't really want to go, actually.
Shame. Where's your class?
I'll go to the Phantom of the Opera, but this doesn't really interest me. But anyway.
Just once, like or a concert or something.
Let's go to the Phantom of the Opera.
Anyways, that's everything that I've written down.
To talk about. I feel like this was quite a dull conversation.
Yes, we're just arguing. Well, do tell us what you thought of the chapters. Anything interesting stood out to you? Do you fans of opera, would you care to go to an opera with us? We can all go together. Have you ever been to a ball before? Never. Do you know any of the old dances? Because when we first moved to Missouri, we had it with another homeschool group doing contra dances, which are like old English country dances. And,
Like Jane Austen dancing.
so that was incredibly fun. But, have you guys ever done anything like that? What's your favorite dances to dance? Do you think the Prince is in on it, on the scheme?
And this Pimpernel scheme.
Yes. Who would you cast as Chauvelin?
It's so sad.
Catherine's Lament.
It is. I can't wait till we get to the end. Yes. I still want to see the musical.
I know. I tried looking. It's a funny story. I looked up and I found a musical. I didn't watch it yet, so I showed it to. We were sitting down to watch it the other night, and it turns out it's like in German or something.
Yeah, it was funny.
Without any subtitles. It was quite funny.
Well,
I have to keep looking. I didn't look very hard, so I have to keep looking. Anyways,
alright, well, we'll have to wrap this up.
farewell.
Alright.
Good night.
We'll
Au
see you
revoir.
next week. Do comment. Bye-bye.
Bye.